Hi, my name is Lorraine Watry and welcome to my studio. I am a watercolor artist and I've worked with watercolor for 26 years now, and I thought I would start a new series of videos where I go over different tips, tricks, and techniques for working with watercolor. And hopefully these short videos will help you in your journey, and if you have a question or a technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will try to accommodate that in a future video. This tip and trick video is going to talk about blooms and what they are and how to get them if you want them, and how to adjust them or get rid of them if you get a bloom that you don't want. So blooms are caused when the moisture level in the paint that you are applying to your paper is different than what is already on the paper. And an easy way to show it is, I'm going to pull out some cobalt and I am going to try to put this on sort of dry because it'll show, it'll happen faster that way. Not that it has to be dry, but just that it will, the actual bloom will occur faster. So I could put that on pretty easily. It was wet enough I can apply the paint to the paper. And now if I go and just kind of load up my brush with water, and if I hold it over here you can see, I think, well, it's not quite that wet, you can see it dripping. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for. I want it really wet. And before this is dry, if I even just touch down here at the bottom, I believe you'll start to see a bloom happening, and what the bloom is doing is the wetter area wants to push against the drier part of the paint, and it starts to create this cauliflower-like shape with hard edges, and it pushes the pigment out to the outer edges of that shape. Now I can create a bloom with color as well if you want to see just what the color does. So I'll grab some Quin Rose, or actually it's Quin Lilac, on my brush, and I'm just going to really load that up right there. And this has to be on pigment that is not quite dry. So this is a little drier right in here. This was still a little wet. But as these two are pushing against the drier area, so these are both wetter, as they're pushing, they will start to create that bloom look. Now blooms can also be used for texture. So just because maybe you don't want to get a bloom, sometimes you might want a bloom. So I'm going to use the cobalt again, and I will show you a couple ways to get texture. And I've used this in the background of a painting for really interesting texture. And you can use a water bottle, you can use a toothbrush, you could use your fingers to flick some water. I'm going to grab an old toothbrush here and just take that off. Alright, so this, in order for it to work well, the section of paint that I've put on the paper needs to start to lose a little bit of its shine. And so I'm going to get a little water on the toothbrush, and I'm actually going to lay, let's see if I can do this without causing an issue with the blooms that I'm trying to create there. Make a little makeshift thing to put on top of that. Okay, so then I can take my toothbrush, and if I flick with a little bit of water, I can get little miniature blooms to happen. So while this area is still damp, using the toothbrush, or you could use a spray bottle, and I'll try the spray bottle on this corner. I'm trying to see how I can get my hand out of the way here. Okay. And so the spray bottle can give you water droplets as well. And actually there's a really big area of water coming down right there, so I'm going to lift that so it doesn't cause issues by just pushing all that away. So both the toothbrush and the spray bottle can cause little blooms on your paper that can give you a really interesting effects. So in that case, you might want to create a bloom. There are other textures like the backs of landscape or like a garden scene that you might want to have sort of blurry looking blooms happening. Let me undo this one right quick. And so you can see that the bloom, especially on this one, is creating this really funky looking, like I said, kind of cauliflower type shape, where it's pushing the pigment. You're getting hard edges and light edges. And if you don't want that, I'll show you a method to try to get rid of a bloom as it's happening in a few seconds here. So you might want blooms, and so just to show you right quick that you can create an interesting background with blooms, not that that's not interesting, but if you wanted to add other colors, I'm going to create a little scene here, and I'll use just a variety of greens and blues. So I'm using New Gamboge and some cobalt, and I'll just kind of paint this on sort of quickly with some variety to it. So this might be behind some flowers, a background with maybe some other plants growing back there that would have some variety in color. And so I'll get that in there, and then I can take, I'll use the toothbrush for this one. I can take the toothbrush and by flicking it, I can get little miniature blooms to happen. Now I may have done this one a little too early because it's still shiny enough that some of that water that I just flicked on there is actually getting incorporated into the pigment around it. So this is what not to do if you're trying to get a bloom, is that if it's too wet, when you spritz the water on there, it will just kind of merge with the moisture around it. There are a few lighter areas, but it's not going to be quite as dramatic because I went a little fast on applying the water. Now, if you have a bloom happening, so I'll create a bloom sort of like that first one, and you want to try to get it to go away, if you don't want a bloom, then you can try this method. Now, I am going to be using what's called a mop brush to try to get rid of the bloom. But if you don't have a mop brush, if you have a brush that's got soft bristles and generally a round brush that is soft bristles, and you want to use it dry for this method, it can have the same effect as the mop brush. But I really like the mop, so I have those. All right, so I'm going to take some water and I'll just press it right in there so that I'm getting a bloom happening. Now, if you have a bloom and you want to try this method, you need to let some of the shine of the paper start dispersing. You can't do this too soon, because if you do, it actually will pull the wet paint and cause a hard edge that can cause more issues than actually fix. All right, just soaking up a little bit of that pigment down there. Now this water that pushed down into there went really fast, and it's pushing all the way down to the bottom. This is a mop brush, and this is by Royal. It's a 3/4 inch mop. And then I also have a small makeup brush that I use as a smaller mop, because in some situations this other one is just too big. And then I'm going to watch, so this upper edge up here is a little drier than down here. So you use this dry, like I said, and this won't necessarily get your color, have an even wash, but it can get rid of that edge without so that it doesn't have a hard cauliflower look to it. So you might have to come back over the whole shape and add a little bit of color to try to equalize it if you were trying to get an exact even look. And then as I get down to the bottom, and I am barely swishing this over the surface, and there's just a little bit of hair or something on there, and a little bit of moisture in the center. And so what I'm doing is actually equalizing the edges where it's a little drier here and it was a little wetter in the center. I'm actually getting those, I'm actually pulling up a little bit of the moisture that's on the paper into the mop, and then I am getting the edges to blur back into each other so that it's not got a hard edge. So it's not perfect, it's not a perfectly smooth wash, whoops, put my finger right on it, but it doesn't have that bloom look anymore. And if you can catch it before it's completely dry, that is a way that you can adjust a bloomed area. Now if it is completely dry, that's still slightly damp actually. Let me dry that upper section and I'll be right back. Alright, so if you have a bloom like this one that is completely dry, there are a couple things you can try, and I would still kind of take it gently and basically know it's maybe not going to be a perfect solution, but it can adjust it so that maybe the bloom is not as noticeable. And so the first thing is I'm taking clear water and I'm just gently washing it over that area. Now, because this is cobalt, that clear water will kind of wake up the paint pretty quickly just because cobalt is easier to adjust and move. It's not a staining pigment. And so already that area that was a bloom is not as noticeable. There is a lighter area here and a little bit of a cauliflower area there. And then I can take a little bit of my blue pigment from off the palette and just gently swiping some of that in there. And I'm trying to, I'm not really trying to move the surface pigment a whole lot because I don't want to cause hard edges or something. So that now is suitable that I could continue with my painting and I would be okay with that. It would depend on where this is. If this is some place that I wanted a really smooth passage of color, that would be a little harder to solve. And actually, because I only wet right in there, I'm getting a little bit of a hard edge. So therefore, I can take the mop. I'm creating a new bloom as I'm trying to solve the old one. So using the mop, I can get this to blur just a little bit. And I kind of swish it sort of in a circular method, and it's, like I said, just barely whisper soft as I'm going over the paper. So you don't want hard pressure with this at all. And then if you ever get a lot of color on the hairs of the mop, you can go ahead and wash it and dry it, but you want to use it, for this method, you want to use it dry. Alright, so better, and that moisture level that I had added up there now is dispersed, and so that won't cause a new bloom. So those are methods that you can get blooms or not get blooms, and how you can adjust them if you end up with a bloom that you didn't want. So those are good things to practice, and I hope that was informative, and please let me know if you have something that you would like to see in a future tip, trick, or technique video, and I will try to accommodate that. And I hope you have a good day, and please follow along if you'd like to see future tip and trick videos in watercolor. Thanks. Bye.